welcome to the Squared Circle Psychobabble. My name is Michael Valenti. This is Ralph Valenti for the best conversations in AEW, WWE, NXT, and New Japan Pro Wrestling. Subscribe and hit that bell for notifications. So, Ralph, Jim Cornette's in the news again.
Yes, he is.
And it's obviously because of what he's done on Twitter and his podcast, which is usually why he's always in the news. So, on a recent episode of his podcast, he was reviewing some match and talking about some guy dressed up in, tennis shoes that were loosely, tied. And he made a comment that said that the way this guy was dressed, he should have been hung in the parking lot. Something along those lines.
Yep.
And someone on Twitter argued with him saying, you're promoting suicide and you shouldn't be doing that. So he went back and said, well, he doesn't have to kill himself. Someone could hang him. And of course, that triggered everyone in the wrestling community on Twitter,
right,
calling for NWA to fire him, boycott NWA, which, to be honest with you, has been highly successful so far, to the point where some of our fans are saying we should start reviewing NWA Power. Yeah. But NWA has, made a statement saying, we've talked to Jim. What he said was wrong. However, he's still going to be our color commentator. He's still a big part of the show. So, basically, it's a strike one in this regard.
Sure.
I think might have been the right call on this one. I understand what Jim Cornette was trying to do. It wasn't exactly the right way to say it. Mistakes happen. So, but he went on top of that. And talked about Dave Meltzer,
yes, he did.
AEW, and their fans.
Fans, the wrestling, the stars within the organization, and all serious. In all seriousness, he certainly is a controversial individual. Whether he's talking about AEW, the wrestling industry, shouldn't be joking about suicide or hanging a wrestler by a rope or anything like that, especially in today's society.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not here to dissect that. We're here more or less to have a conversation about his views on AEW, the wrestling industry as a whole. So I guess that's really what we can kind of dive into.
Sure. Now, in this same episode where he was explaining the whole back and forth between this Twitter account and him and what he said and whatever, he did bring up AEW and their fans and how basically they will eat up anything, whether it's good or bad.
Yes.
And also said Dave Meltzer will praise them with every single thing that they do, whether it's good or bad, and showing his bias. And we've actually had an episode where we said that Meltzer would show his bias because he said the Young Bucks versus Lucha Brothers was the greatest ladder match ever, better than Shawn and Razor.
Yep.
Don't want to really go back into that ordeal, but does Jim Cornette actually have a point here when it comes to their fans where they really can't, like AEW can do no wrong?
It certainly seems like whatever AEW does, their hardcore fan base is willing to overlook the logistics of a lot of things in professional wrestling. Whereas if you compare it to, and even some of the critics like Meltzer, who won't call them on certain things. Now, a few weeks back, there was an episode where I called out that Pentagon had actually, tagged out, went for a pin when he wasn't the legal man. The referee acknowledged it and actually counted it. And then every time I call those things out, people say, well, that's nitpicking. That's the type of stuff that drives Jim Cornette nuts. That's the type of stuff that drives me a little crazy, because it's like, well, we're going to nitpick on things that WWE does, but we're not going to hold AEW accountable when they do certain things that just defy logic. I mean, everybody knows, and I get it. Okay, I've heard the excuses. Oh, well, they wrestle in Mexico and all over the world and by their rules. But those rules were never explained.
Right.
So why do they get to just do what they want to do and the fans are willing to overlook that? Now, an example I'll use is this. So if you look at SmackDown this past week, right?
Mm-hmm.
There was a show, a podcast that I follow, and they were pointing out all of the issues with the whole thing, the dynamic between Brock Lesnar going to SmackDown, saying that he was going to quit and just go to Raw, and Paul Heyman saying that, Rey Mysterio couldn't go to SmackDown because he's contracted to Raw on USA, but Paul Heyman is a Raw guy, so how is he on? It gets all convoluted, right? It doesn't make any sense. They dissected it to nauseum. They pointed out all the flaws with it. Now, everybody knows in a tag match, you tag somebody, you're the legal man, or you're not the legal man any longer. When we point that out or point certain things like that out here on our show, people comment and they say, oh, well, you're nitpicking. No, it's just holding them accountable.
Right.
And I think there are certain elements of the show and what they do from time to time that Jim Cornette calls out, and people aren't as willing to, admit wrongdoing by AEW for whatever reason.
Right. Now, have AEW done a lot of things well? They absolutely have.
Yeah.
And they are doing very well in their first month on regular television. They've had steady ratings, within the 0.43 to 0.46 in the 18 to 49 demographic, being in the top 5 of cable shows and staying within that 1 million viewership. A lot of people were not probably saying that for AEW in this first month. And they've proved people wrong. Have their shows been entertaining? Absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's entertainment. It is a show. So if people like it, you just go with what works. So are there things that frustrate me? Yes. The tag team situation is one thing that frustrates me. But at the end of the day, their 2 hours are just better right now than other wrestling shows. So it's something that, people might say, you know what, we're going to turn a blind eye because the rest of the show is just that good that I could care less if tagging in is, really something.
Yeah. So one of the remarks that Cornette actually made was, they're more or less trying to put on a performance with all the high spots and everything, and not so much trying to make people believe that this is a contest. Now, the one argument that many of the AEW loyal fan base will say is, oh, well, it's a work. Everybody knows it's a work, blah, 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 right? I've known since I was like a little kid, 5 or 6 years old, that wrestling was a work. I saw Hulk Hogan do a blade job where he got hit with a chair. I knew that there was blading involved. I knew that the outcomes were all predetermined. I knew that, going into this, they knew who the winner was going to be and they knew who the loser was going to be. It's been like that since, I don't even know how long now. It's not like people are just finding out now here in 2019 that wrestling is a work.
Wait, it's a work?
I guess so. So his main argument, and this is where I agree with him, is wrestling is still meant to be portrayed as a contest, a simulated fight. It's supposed to be where they're competing for something. Wins and losses matter. That's the whole thing with AEW, that wins and losses matter, right? So his main comment about this is they're going out there and they're just doing all these high spots. It doesn't make any sense. And in some cases, I think he's right about this. And they're not worried about making it look like a legitimate contest. And the best, I guess, example you can give of that is Marco Stunt being involved in a match against one of the best tag teams in the world. And that's just one example I can give.
Right.
And he takes an exception with that because he's worked within the wrestling industry for however long, a good majority of his life. He has all this experience. He's been everywhere there is to be. And he feels like they're doing more harm to the industry. And I'm not saying I agree with that aspect of it, but I understand it.
See, here's the thing, though. I think a lot of the frustrations that Cornette and people like Cornette, the traditionalist wrestling fan, really have an issue with the tag team division. Outside of that, I think there's a lot of praise. And even Cornette has gone on and said, the stuff that Cody has done is awesome.
Yep.
The stuff that Moxley does is good. It's really their main event storytelling that's really, really awesome that you wish WWE would sort of do the same. You take notes on it. And, I said on the review last week how AEW did WWE better than WWE, and I still got crap for that. I'm praising AEW, but they're like, no, WWE sucks.
Well, that's one of the biggest comments. When you're critical of AEW, the biggest comment is, oh, WWE fanboy. Well, no, Cornette's giving legitimate reasons why he feels this way. He's backing it up with facts. Mm-hmm. And to just be like, to dismiss it as, oh, well, he's old, he's out of touch. I'm more than willing to admit that there is certainly a movement going on within the wrestling industry. That's a given, because of the success of AEW, and it definitely feels much different than anything WWE is doing. But the main thing that he's trying to point out is he wants AEW to succeed, and he wants the wrestling industry to move forward and not backward. So if they try to do certain things and they try to, treat it not so much as a contest, and eventually people lose interest in it and they go out of business. I'm not saying I want that to happen, but we don't know. They've had 6 shows. It could happen, right?
Right.
Now it becomes that much harder for any other wrestling promotion other than the WWE to get any type of contract to mainstream TV.
Mm-hmm.
So as his comments are, as long as you're putting guys out there like Marco Stunt or Orange Cassidy to a certain extent. And again, I'm not saying I agree with this, but some of it I understand. That's very hard for a non-wrestling loyal AEW fan to accept as a contest, because you have a 120-pound man up against a guy that's one of the very best in the world. It's just not believable to a fan, or a non-fan, I should say, who just is flipping through the channels and seeing that for the first time.
But here's the thing, is AEW, and they have said this, they're not really trying to cater to a quote-unquote casual fan. They're just trying to cater to their fans.
And that's a problem.
But is it a problem, though,
Yes.
when they are consistent with their viewership, consistent with their ratings, people are still buying tickets to their shows so far, they could care less if Orange Cassidy is play kicking and it looks completely stupid.
But this is the problem. As long as if they're just going to try and cater to their fan base consistently like this, there's no room for expansion or growth. Unless there are somewhere on Earth, there are more like-minded people, which there could be, and they may be into stuff like this, but they've had 6 shows. And unless they try to grow their business and attract new people, what's going to end up happening is eventually the guys that are going to be really good in the company, like your Kenny Omegas, your Moxleys, whoever, their contracts will run out. And there's going to be other organizations that are going to throw a lot of money at them, and the WWE is probably going to give them a big contract offer. And I'm not saying they're going to go there, but the only way you're going to keep your talent that you have, or keep the talent that you have under contract, especially if they get more and more popular, is by paying them. And if you can't grow your industry past where you're at right now, or your company where you're at right now, how do you expect to retain those people? So I get where he's coming from with this. He wants to see the company grow and cater to a larger audience, or try to expand past where they currently are, and not cater to just their fan base. And in order to be successful, I think they have to do that. And I made this comparison last week. They have a very loyal following. It's like they're the underground band that's just waiting for their one big hit.
Yep.
Do they want to become the Foo Fighters of the rock industry? Do they want to become really big? You should be striving for that. You don't just want to be an underground band that has a couple of the songs, because eventually the fans are going to get sick of stuff. They've had 6 shows. Things are going to get old. WWE was the hottest product in the wrestling industry not so long ago, and now it's stale. If they continue to do the same things over and over, week after week, and it's the same matches and everything else, yeah, it's going to get old no matter what they're doing. But I think that's one of his main points.
But if this gets to a point where Cornette basically wants everyone to conform to the WWE structure, do we end up getting the same cookie cutter crap that we get from WWE in AEW, because that's what works? That's what makes money. This is something different. And I think people want just something different from WWE. And if people, in the United States, there's a lot of people out there that think the only wrestling in the world is WWE.
Sure.
So if AEW can present something completely different, which means having a Marco Stunt wrestle Pentagon in a match, which most people would be like, this is stupid, but hey, we're giving you this opportunity to prove you wrong. If we have a guy like Orange Cassidy that could be like, you know what? I could care too less about this match until you give me a reason to in the match, and people eat it up. If you have guys like the Best Friends that are hugging in every single match, we had freaking Billy and Chuck. If we had Billy and Chuck, we can have the Best Friends.
Yeah, and I'm certainly not suggesting I want AEW to be anything like WWE, but they've proven they can do their serious stuff really, really good. Your Cody and Jericho stuff has been really good. A good majority of the matches they've had, overall their shows has been really good. Moxley has been really good, but it's some of the silliness that comes with it. I'll give you an example, and I don't care if people blame or get upset about it. this past week on AEW, you had Kenny Omega come out in pink slippers and a mask. This is a guy that's going to face Jon Moxley, who cut a pretty epic promo last week. Is probably built up to be one of their biggest stars, their biggest badass probably. And you expect me to think that the guy coming out in the pink slippers is going to compete against the guy that just cut the epic promo? Not only that, but when you look at the match that they had, there was that literally a spot where he snapped his fingers and people just fell down. Now, like I said, it comes down to what's believable and what you're trying to portray as a contest. I don't care what type of fan you are and how big of a fan you are of Kenny Omega. That is beyond anything that is believable. It's so silly. It's so ridiculous. Like, this is the guy that's going to go face Jon Moxley, and you want me to pretend like they're at an equal level and he's snapping his fingers and he's coming out in pink slippers? Kenny Omega's great. He's proven he can have great matches, but why all this? Why do they continuously do these silly things? It's like it doesn't make any sense.
Let's put it this way. Kenny Omega, maybe it's to a point where Kenny Omega is so good at what he can do that he could come out with pink slippers and look like some video game character nobody knows, or at least we don't know. Snap his fingers and people fall down, but then could have a legitimate fight to the end, unsanctioned match against Moxley, and people can still take him with the same respect.
Yeah, but you also have to remember, outside of their big fan base right now, or their niche fan base that they have, it has to be believable to other people.
True.
And the big thing that you have to overcome, especially when it comes to professional wrestling, is that it's quote unquote fake to people, right? So you have to overcome that perception.
Mm-hmm.
If they put on an episode of AEW and they see a guy snap his fingers and everybody suddenly falls down, or you see a 120-pound man against a guy who is one of the best wrestlers in the world, it's very, very hard for a non-wrestling fan to buy into that. So that's what he's talking about. That's his main point. Do you want to cater to your fan base that you currently have, a niche market, or do you want to expand? If you're an AEW fan, you want them to expand because that means they can attract better or more talent. You can get some of the best people in the world. If they grow and they make enough money, maybe they can make a bid on a guy like
Seth Rollins.
Okada, somebody like that. But if they just stick to this fan base, eventually they'll move on. They'll find something different. They'll find something that they can get into that isn't professional wrestling, and you'll lose your fan base.
Right, but I think today's world, and not just wrestling, I think in music you see it, in sports you see it. I think there's a lot of these niches that can still be profitable businesses, and they don't have to be number one in cable. They don't need to have the biggest profitable business. They're operating, they're making a profit, and they're working. In music, you still have your Ariana Grandes and your Drakes that are top of the charts or whatever, or even, as you said, the Foo Fighters and rock. But then you look at people that are musicians making money, like a Poppy, who people will know and has been on NXT before. In rap, there's tons of rap artists that, people in rap know, but maybe the top 40 don't know. And in rock, you still have the Foo Fighters, but then you have bands like one of my favorite bands, The Darkness, who haven't had a successful hits in the United States since 2003, but are still touring here in 2019.
But here's the thing. Look at the 80s. Look at the hair metal. How big was hair metal? Selling out stadiums. Now you go and see those guys and they're playing like in front of a fraction of the...
Well, depending on the bands.
Motley
Crue could still sell out.
Sure.
Bon Jovi could still sell out. Van Halen could still sell out.
Right. But there's no saying that their fan base is going to be loyal forever. And that's the main thing. He wants... His main thing is portraying it as a contest, portraying it as something that's believable, because if you're a non-wrestling fan, I'm sorry, you talk to anybody that doesn't watch professional wrestling, they think it's goofy, they think it's carny, they think it's fake. You have to overcome that perception. It's very, very hard to overcome that perception when they do some of the silly things that they do. Now, the things you're talking about, them catering to their current fan base, how is that any different than what TNA was doing? How's that any different from what TNA was? They had their fan base. Everybody was saying, if you talk to a TNA fan, oh, this is better than WWE. They got so much talent. It's different. It feels fresh. Where are they now? They're barely hanging on. They have talent now, but
they're actually on they're on the upswing again.
They are now, but that's because they made a lot of changes under new ownership and everything. But the TNA that was, trying to compete against WWE, it ran its course.
Well, maybe this one here, maybe they learned the lessons that TNA did, that WCW even did, and it's like, listen, we're just going to do our thing. We're not going to go on Monday nights. Our goal is never to go on Monday nights. We're going to stay on Wednesday nights.
And that's fine.
And dominate the ratings on Wednesdays. And that's it.
And that's fine. There's been 95% of the stuff that they've done has been really good to great, in my opinion. It's just some of the things that do come across as silly and almost carny. Having the Young Bucks come out, and I was critical of it last time, I'll be critical of it again. Having them come out as Street Fighter characters is specific to their fan base right now. To other people, these are your top guys, the Young Bucks and Kenny Omega. And this is the example Jim Cornette made, and I actually made the same comparison back whenever we did this a couple months ago.
Fighter Fest.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, the top guy in the industry, is he going to come out dressed up as a Pokemon character? No. That's your biggest badass, your number one draw.
He did have a toy sheriff badge for a while, though.
Yeah, and it was funny, and I get it, but it's kind of like pick and choose. What do you guys want to do? And that's my concern with AEW. Are they catering too much to their current fan base?
Maybe.
With some of the silly stuff they do.
Maybe, but let us know in the comments what you think of Jim Cornette's comments. Not necessarily Jim Cornette himself. We don't want this to be a hate mongering on Jim Cornette, and the AEW fan base, what Dave Meltzer, his bias, and everything else with AEW in the comments below. Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at SCPB Podcast. And for the best conversations in AEW, WWE, NXT, and New Japan Pro Wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti, and thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.